Well, gentlemen of the Holy League, I have a couple things to talk to you about tonight. First of all, let us take a look at the readings for the first Sunday after Epiphany. Now, you might have noticed that the gospel was the same as the gospel we had for this past Sunday, the Feast of the Holy Family. And you might not have noticed that the epistle is different. And why is that? Well, the first Sunday after Epiphany goes way, way back. And we can look at the sermons of many of the church fathers and doctors, and we find that the gospel of the boy Jesus at the age of 12 being lost and found in the temple goes way, way back. But the Feast of the Holy Family was not established until the time of Pope Leo XIII, and he was Pope from 1878 till 1903. So the Feast of the Holy Family is fairly recent, and without changing the gospel of the day, the other parts of the Mass were changed. So we still have the same gospel for the Feast of the Holy Family as we do for the first Sunday after the Epiphany. But after that Mass was said on Sunday, then for the weekdays of this first week after the Epiphany, we have the readings and the propers from the first Sunday after Epiphany, which is no longer celebrated on Sunday, but is still in the Missal because, well, that's just what we do. We don't discard things, we just keep adding and fitting things in. So we are celebrating the historic Mass of the first Sunday after Epiphany, even though it has been since displaced by the Feast of the Holy Family. All right, so that's the explanation of that. Let's take a look then at the epistle to the Romans from the Blessed Apostle Paul. And he exhorts us by the mercy of God to present our bodies as a sacrifice, but a living sacrifice that's holy and pleasing to God, and, as he notes, your spiritual service. Now, another word for this, and we see this in the Latin, is the word ratio, or rationabile, which refers to the intellect. So our spiritual service refers to our intellect, because as human beings we have a rational, spiritual soul, and that's what distinguishes us from animals and from plants. So plants have a vegetative soul. And you apparently, I found out last night that there are vegans who won't eat carrots because in eating a carrot you're destroying the vegetative soul of the carrot, whereas they will eat the such things as the florets from broccoli because you're not destroying the vegetative soul, you're just cutting off the little floret of broccoli. So yes, plants have a soul, and it is called a vegetative soul. And so when the vegetative soul dies, the plant dies, and it is not an immortal soul. So that soul of the carrot will not dwell in eternity. When the carrot dies, the carrot is dead, and they're delicious, especially as you steam them and maybe add a little butter and curry powder. I think they're especially delicious. But let's move on to the next type of soul, which is that of an animal. An animal has what is called a sensitive soul, referring to the use of its five senses. An animal, well, at least, some animals are blind. I think moles are blind, but even so, they have other senses that they rely on. But among the five senses, we could say that a dog, for instance, has eyes, so it can see. It has ears, so it can hear. It has nostrils, so it can smell. It has the use of taste and some sort of locution. It barks, or it roughs, or it growls, or it gurs. I guess that's a growl. It whimpers, it whines. And so it has some use of, its sense of, speech. And then we have also the sense of touch. So a dog can feel. So a dog has the use of its senses, and therefore the dog has a sensitive soul. But a sensitive soul is not an immortal soul. And so when the soul of the dog dies, when the body of the dog dies, the soul dies with it. And so that particular dog does not live into eternity. Now there's a difference with the human soul, which is a rational, intellectual, spiritual soul. And it is because the human being has a spiritual, rational soul that soul is immortal. It's because it's a spiritual, intellectual, or rational soul. And it is that independence of the use of senses and of vegetative growth, both of which the human also has. So like a carrot, we have a vegetative soul. We grow up to a certain point. And like an animal, we have a sensitive soul because we have the use of our senses. But unlike either, we also have a rational soul, which is a spiritual soul, which we share with the angels. Angels also have a spiritual soul. And so that soul lives into eternity. So when St. Paul speaks about offering our bodies as a living sacrifice, he is also referring here to our spiritual service or worship using a word that is also used in the Roman canon, and that is rationabile, the rational worship. In other words, that what it means to offer ourselves is that we are both body and rational spiritual soul. So while it is important that we are physically present, it is also important that we are intellectually present, although our minds tend to drift. We get distracted. Our minds drift. We're listening to the sounds that are happening outside. If a car races past the church, that will distract us. If we hear something overhead and we're wondering what that constant noise is, it distracts us. If the dog across the street starts barking, it distracts us. But our goal is to be intellectually present, and that we would offer our intellect, our rational spiritual soul, along with our body to the Lord. So there are various ways you can do that. You can read along. You can read along in the English translation as we go through the Mass, or you can just take it all in and sort of marvel at the ceremonies of the Mass, and listen for what God wishes to speak to you in your soul. You can also read a set of meditations on the Mass, and some old prayer books and hand missals will have a set of meditations. At the Interibit Altare Dei, you'll have this other meditation that accompanies that, or maybe it summarizes it. At the ascent of the altar, it has a little prayer for you to pray. During the introit, it has a prayer for you to pray, and basically takes you through the whole Mass with a meditation that is meant to help to draw you into the mysteries being offered here. And then another way that Pope Pius XII recommended, Mediator Dei, to actually participate or actively participate, is to pray the Rosary. Especially if we are meditating on the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary, we are meditating on the very thing that is being represented here. So praying the Rosary is a meditation, if you will, on the Mass itself. So those are ways that intellectually we can offer our rational spiritual worship. And that having been said, let us now turn to the other thing I wish to speak to you about this evening, and that is the Novena to Saint Sebastian. So when we think about, we think about the prayers we just prayed. Now, there are prayers for athletes, or there's a prayer for athletes, there's a prayer for fortitude, a prayer against illness, prayers from the votive Mass in time of war, and the prayer of St. Sebastian, friend and helper of farmers. Now, it may be that you're not an athlete at all, but you can pray on behalf of athletes. And maybe someday you'll be an athlete, or maybe you were once an athlete and you're no longer able to do so. But nevertheless, as we pray through these prayers, you find something in them that applies to you. Prayers for fortitude. Well, we can all use that. Now, prayer to St. Sebastian against illness. And here again, and here's where our intellect comes into play. It may be that you are not ill right now. It may be that you don't have any trials that threaten to destroy your beliefs in the mercy of Christ. But there are people out there who are struggling with their health. There are people out there who are needing our intercession. You can pray on behalf of someone who is sick. You can relate that to other trials you've had in your life. But even so, it may be that the person who's sick doesn't know how to pray. It could be that the person who's sick doesn't have any faith. But we can pray as Christians. We can pray on their behalf. We can be a voice for them, if you will. And that is part of what it means to be a Catholic. That as a Catholic, we offer ourselves to God on behalf of the rest of the world. And that is what it means to exercise what is called the common priesthood of the baptized. We offer ourselves for the sake of the rest of the world. And because there are at least 5 good men in this city, we pray that God will have mercy and not destroy the city for its wickedness. I think there are more than 5 good men in this city, and we need to be among those men. Now, prayers from the votive Mass in time of war. Well, it may be that we are not in a physical war, but we're certainly in a spiritual one. And we are in a war unlike other wars in the past. But it seems as though we are in the midst of a war. And so it is good, since St. Sebastian is the patron of soldiers, it is good that we would pray these prayers for the votive Mass in time of war. Now, this last prayer, St. Sebastian, friend and helper of farmers. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not a farmer, but maybe you grew some crops in your garden this last summer, or maybe you'd like to. But we can certainly be praying for farmers who provide us with our food. It is said on the news that there are shortages of food in the grocery stores. I personally haven't seen it, but I have heard about it from others. So we need to pray that there will be good weather for the food that will be grown. But you'll also see in this prayer that this is a good prayer for everybody. It's a good prayer for families or individuals. That we're asking for his intercession against illnesses and pestilences, against sin, lukewarmness, loose morals, and human respect. We're asking for to be shielded from being quarrelsome and from drinking excessively, from being immoderate, and from sloth, from jealousy, hard-heartedness, superstition, and any kind of dishonesty, etc., and to strengthen us in our service for God, our fellow men, and our country, and that we would long for our eternal country. And those are prayers that everybody can pray. So be thinking during the course of the next 8 days of how you can make good use of this. There's a privileged time before the feast of a saint. A privileged time. You can pray a novena to St. Sebastian anytime, but there's a privileged time before the feast of a saint. This is his time, and he is considered among what are called the 14 holy helpers. 14 holy helpers. And so they are 14 saints that have proven themselves especially good at answering prayers. All right, the final thing I wish to speak to you about tonight is a sense of defending the castle, if you will. Now, we have to think about defending our souls. We need to defend our souls against any intruders. So when we think about, for instance, distraction in prayer, we have to defend ourselves against distractions in prayer. And that can be very difficult. But we also have to defend ourselves against distractions that are temptations. And really we could say that any temptation is a distraction. It captures your attention away from what you're supposed to be doing. And our goal is to keep custody of our senses, because we also have that sensitive soul. So we have to keep custody of our senses by means of our intellect and our will. That when we have a distraction that is in the form, of a temptation, that we learn how to keep custody of our eyes, we learn how to keep custody of our ears. We might hear things, but we don't have to listen to them. We might see things, but not look at them. We might smell things, but choose not to partake. We might see something that looks delicious and decide by an act of the will that we're not going to eat that. We might touch something. We might feel something, but that's different from touching something that we shouldn't touch. So we need to keep custody of our senses. We also need to keep custody of our heart, of our affections. Now, that relates then to a minor order in the ancient church that is called a porter. Now, a porter could be related to a sacristan or an usher in the church, a doorman. And it is one of the seven orders, among the minor orders, the four minor orders in the church. I want to talk to you a little bit about this order of porter, because while we have men who are designated to watch the door, and we have men who are designated to take up the collection, but we all need to be aware of what's happening in the church. On Christmas morning, we had very few, at one particular Mass, we had very few parishioners here and a lot of visitors. And we had a couple things happen where if the men of our parish were here, they wouldn't have happened. So I just need to make you aware that sometimes you might be here, but there may not be a doorman back there. And usually at daily Mass, that's the case. So you men need to be aware of what's happening in the church. Now, if there are four men in the church, it's good to have you on the four corners. It's good to have one in that back corner, one in that back corner, one in this front corner, and one in that front corner. And why is that? Well, because we have a door here. We have two entrances back there, and we have a door up here. And we need to have the guys kind of watching what's going on. Now, normally we don't have any problems here, but it's because people know that the place is well guarded. And so it's not an easy target, and that's good. But we need to be aware of that. And it may be that you personally have not been designated to do something, but you need to take that on. If you're here and you're the only man here, well, the best place for you to sit is going to be back in one of the back corners to keep an eye on things, so that the ladies up front can be secure and safe, even if there's no danger of anything. But even so, if you're the only guy in the church, it's best that you sit in the back so you can keep an eye on the whole place. Well, let's take a look at this order of porter, and we'll relate this to the things that we need to do here in the church, but also relate this to what we need to do in our own personal lives to grow as Christian men. So, the minor order of porter, and we look back to second Paralipomenon, also known as 2 Chronicles in the Old Testament. He appointed also porters in the gates of the house of the Lord, that none who was unclean in anything should enter in. So you see that we have different parts of the church. We have there's the street where everybody is. There's the piazza with the fountain, where people might stroll through. They know they're on the church grounds, but they haven't entered into the building. But they're still, if you will, in a part of the church. Then there's the narthex out there, which is closed to the main body of the church, which is the nave. And then we have the outer sanctuary here, designated by the gate and the communion rail. And then we have the inner sanctuary, designated by the 3 steps going up to the high altar. And these are all various places that sort of designate different functions, different roles, different offices within the church. So the clergy, the priest generally is the one who is in the Holy of Holies. The other servers and the other clerics are here in the outer sanctuary. The baptized faithful are in the nave. The unbaptized are in the narthex. Although if any of you here are unbaptized, you are welcome to join us for prayer. But the faithful come forward for communion. So the narthex is considered for those who are seeking baptism but who have not yet been baptized, and that's where the baptistry is. And then outside in the piazza, well, that is where the Gentiles go. Those who have not been baptized, but who are men and women of goodwill, and they like sharing in something of what we do here. And then on the street are those who have no interest whatsoever and keep far away. So let's consider then more about the order of porter. So the porters are the guardians of the doors of the temple in the old law. Their main office was to prevent anyone from going into the temple who was unfit and forbidden to enter. Now we're told in the old Roman pontifical that this is the chief duty of the young man who is ordained in the minor order of porter. The duty of the porter, says the bishop at the ordination ceremony, the duty of the porter is to ring the bells of the church, to open the church and the sacristy, and to open the book for the priest who preaches. So we see here that a porter is a doorman, an usher, and a sacristan. And we usually split those up so that the men who are serving at the Mass act as the sacristans, and then we have some ladies who help with the linens and such, the cleaning of the linens and the beautifying of things. But we have certain duties, and the men of the parish, you want to be thinking about the security of the place. All right, let's continue. The office of porter obviously goes back to the Old Testament, and they who held this honor were specially selected and placed under the supervision of the Levites. Some of the most beautiful of the Psalms seem to have been written by the faithful keepers of the temple doors. This would be for instance, Psalm 83, how lovely are your habitations, and the Ecce benedicite Domino, behold, bless the Lord. Oh, Psalm 133. How does that go? I just looked it up. I can't remember how it goes. Anyway, so this is the first of the minor orders to be exercised in the early church. Now, what are the duties of the porter then? The spiritual powers, which the church bestows with the order today, is exercised by the priest. The porter must exercise a spiritual relation to the people whom he is called upon to serve. So you could say, in a way, that while the priest is serving God up here, that the porter is serving those at the door, not in a priestly way, but that he is called to serve those who are at the door. The bishop makes this clear when he gives to the candidate an instruction upon the duties of the porter as follows. As you open and shut the doors of the visible church building with the keys entrusted to you, so also you must close against sin and open to God his own invisible temple, that is, the hearts of his faithful people. So the youthful porter, like St. Peter, is given the keys of the church. We can consider, for instance, Brother Andre, St. Andre of Montreal, who was a porter, and he greeted people who came to the shrine of St. Joseph. He also provided them with sacramentals. For instance, he would tell them to go and get this oil from a particular place where there was a statue of St. Joseph, and he would advise them to bless themselves with this oil, and many people received great healings from that. So we could associate that with the rosaries that we give out, scapulars, all the prayer cards, the giving out of bulletins, and that's what a porter does. Now, if you were here and you obviously saw a visitor who didn't know what they were doing, it would be good for you as a man, a parishioner, that you would show them where the red missalettes are for the Latin Mass, and help them to figure out, what page to turn to, where do they start, how do they follow along. You could, offer that they could sit near you and sit and stand and kneel when you do. That would be a good thing to do. If a gentleman came in and he was wearing a hat, it'd be good for you to remind him to remove his hat as he comes into the church. And especially if you see someone wandering about, maybe seeming like they're going to go someplace where they shouldn't go, you should, greet him and help him to find a place where he can go. All right, let's continue. The porter then has a duty to keep and preserve as far as possible the faith and devotion of the faithful people of God. The Church demands that two virtues in particular ought to adorn those whom she ordains as porters. May they be, she prays, most faithful in their care for the house of God, and again that they may be docile in the service of God and his church, ever ready with a simple and obedient heart to follow the Lord wheresoever he goes. So we think about that also in terms of if you were to see trash on the floor, that you would pick that up and put it in the wastebasket in the back. Wanting to keep the place beautiful. If you see, that leaves have fallen from the poinsettias in the back, you pick them up and, help to keep the place looking good and respectful in the way that the church looks. All right, so the model for this office of porter, or for this role of the porter, order of porter, is St. Francis of Assisi. And let's see what we have to hear about him. The gentle heart of St. Francis of Assisi was, from his earliest youth, attracted to the service of God, even while living in his father's house and apparently preparing for a career in the world. He was pained at the untidiness and lack of care which marked many of the churches and chapels he was accustomed to visit. He set about to clean these holy places and saw to it that new or fresh linens lay upon the altars. This zeal for the spotless purity and cleanliness of the altar and sanctuary of the Lord's house never left St. Francis. It was a reflection of his own clean and purified heart, which, like an altar, was wholly dedicated to Jesus Christ. All who have accepted the order of porter may well consider whether they take pride and joy in showing their devoted love for our Lord by scrupulous care of the externals of divine worship, the altars, the linens, the vestments, and their own hands and hearts. So this is what we want to consider, that the church is to be beautiful, to be tidy, to be clean, and everything is to be kept in order. So we want to make sure that we are striving to keep our own souls in order. Our senses are in order, our hearts, our affections are in order, and that our demeanor, our external behavior is in order, so that we inspire others. It is said that if a father of a family is devout, his kids will keep the religion. But if the father falls away from the faith, his kids will likely do the same. So we also want to think about that for visitors who come, or for other men who show up, who maybe aren't as interested in their faith, but they show up here for Mass and they see all these men, on Sundays in their suits and ties, devout, pious, but manly, taking things seriously. Well, they're going to start to think about how they are living their own faith. How do they dress for Mass? How do they act when they're at church? They're going to see all these, normal-looking devout men and want to be among you. And so that is how you serve the people at the door. All of you men, whether you're watching the door or taking up the collection or not. So, having all this in mind now, I want to encourage you and exhort you to be thinking of yourself in this manner, and to take it upon yourself when you see something that needs to be done to do it. When you see someone that needs to be greeted, greet them. And even at coffee and donuts, many people who come here will say, "Gosh, everybody's so friendly." And so thank you for that. Well, now let us head next door for our Holy League social. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.